they want straight or bi or lesbian or gay. People love, people love, people love. What we tell our children if they see you cry? People love each other, cry. Working it up together if we both will try. People love each other, cry. Would you rather teach them fear, to hate and to betray? Or will you show them love can grow in many different ways? People love, people love.
But people do watch television. It's how they understand the world. They do read newspapers. They do listen to radio. And they do care. And when they get the information, and that's what counts, and that's why it's so egregious what the media has done around the invasion of Iraq, because if you don't get the information about what's happening over there, what war means, who is dying, and there's no such thing as enemy dead, if you don't find out the reality on the ground, how can you care? But thanks to grassroots groups joining with grassroots media, the majority of people in this country are finding out, and they don't like it one bit. Yes, George Bush and his administration, both in the White House and the Justice Department and his agencies like the FCC, is uniting people around the world against him. And that is what is so significant. With the FCC, you had everyone from the NRA to the feminist anti-war group Code Pink joining together, lobbying the House of Representatives. And now, from the lists to the librarians to the lies that never stop. The spigot never seems to be turned off. I don't know how many of you saw Dick Cheney's performance on Meet the Press with Tim Russert this past Sunday, but even if you didn't, if you listen to Democracy Now! Or watch it, and if you didn't get to see this, I encourage you to go to Tuesday's Democracy Now! At democracynow.org. We took the lies of Dick Cheney one by one, played them from Tim Russert's Meet the Press, and had people responding. It is absolutely unbelievable what the administration continues to put forward, even when the White House itself has disavowed the statements. It shows that they are desperate. Now, Dick Cheney said that Iraq is the geographic center of what happened on 9/11. I mean, I come from New York, where Governor Pataki says he wants to take the statue of Saddam Hussein in Baghdad that was pulled down by U.S. forces and incorporate it into the foundation of the new World Trade Center. What? If that's the case, it probably will be the only connection between the two. Here you have this most horrific event, a 9/11, right? 3,000 people incinerated in a moment in New York. The World Trade Center towers both downed. 8:47, the first plane hits the first tower. 9:03, the second plane hits the second tower. We're broadcasting just blocks from there. We broadcast at 9 o'clock. 3 minutes later, the second tower hits. We didn't even know what happened. The second tower was hit. We just kept broadcasting because we didn't realize we're in the garret of a firehouse. And we were doing a special on September 11th, the significance of September 11th, 1973. The day that Salvador Allende died in the palace in Chile because of the US-backed Pinochet forces rising to power in the coup that took the lives of thousands of Chileans, September 11th, 1973. That was 30 years ago. And this past September 11th, you might have heard our show. Go to the website if you haven't, because what we did is we looked at September 11ths around the world, not just symbolically, the idea of people who've known terror. I like that t-shirt, Democracy Now! And yours as well. Not just symbolically, but the real September 11th. September 11th, 1973 in Chile. September 11th, 1990, when the Guatemalan forces killed Myrna Mack, the Guatemalan anthropologist, the US-backed Guatemalan military. September 11th, 1990. September 11th, 12th, 1977, when the leader of the Black Consciousness movement in South Africa, Steve Biko, was beaten almost to death in a car driven for hundreds of miles by the US-backed apartheid security forces and then killed late that night, early the next morning, September 11th, 1977. September 11th, 1971 at Attica, upstate New York, when then Governor Nelson Rockefeller called out the New York State Troopers, and they opened fire on the uprising that had taken place against the conditions at Attica, and they killed 39 men and wounded more than 80 others. All over the world, we have known terror. September 11th, 2001 was simply the latest, although it was absolutely horrific. And not only those examples, we certainly could find many moments, September 11th in Vietnam, September 11th for slaves in this country over centuries, September 11th for Native Americans. It is so important to know, and that September 11th just brought home to us in such a real way what terror means on our own soil that so many people have known. And that day unites us with people around the world in a global renunciation of terror. Now, you had people like Rita Lasar, who lost her brother Abe Zalmanowitz on the 27th floor of the World Trade Center, and even knowing the worst pain, here's the president in his National Cathedral address invoking the story of Abe, how he wouldn't leave because his best friend Ed was working next to him and he was a paraplegic and he was waiting for the emergency workers to come get him. And they both went down together, even as Abe's brother was screaming on the cell phone, "You can get out, Abe, just leave now." And President Bush talked about him as a hero, and Rita Lasar, his 70-year-old sister, said no. She wrote a letter to the New York Times, and she said, "Even as I know this pain, you will only increase my suffering to know that a sister in Afghanistan will soon lose her brother, not in my name, not in my brother's name," or Phyllis and Orlando Rodriguez, who lost their son, Greg, on the 100th floor of the World Trade Center. He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald. 600 of 900 workers died. And as they remembered their son, they wrote a letter to President Bush, and they said, "Please no, it will only increase our anguish to know that soon a mother and father in Afghanistan will also lose their son, not in our name, not in our son's name." And more people were speaking out. And we heard the stories of their loved ones on television. We watched them tell their stories, but it went from description, when it went from description to prescription, that they had formed Peaceful Tomorrows, peacefultomorrows.org, that they had formed this group of anti-war families who had lost loved ones, who said war is not the answer, that in this new millennium, in this new century, we've got to come up with a way to respond to killing. The answer to the killing of innocent civilians is not the killing of innocent civilians. When they wanted to say that, the media cut away and they brought us the terrorism experts. Those, yeah, they got it right perhaps. Those terrorism experts like Henry Kissinger and Oliver North. That's right, it takes one to know one. And they would tell us how we had to bomb these people, not only the people, but the countries they come from. And I got nervous because I live in the same city that Henry Kissinger lives in. Henry Kissinger is so responsible for what happened in Chile and all the documents that have come out since, so responsible for Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, where it's underestimate to say 2 million people died, so responsible for what happened in Timor, him and Gerald Ford going in '75 to meet with the long-reigning dictator Suharto in Indonesia, giving the go-ahead for Indonesia's invasion to lead to one of the great genocides of the 20th century. 200,000 Timorese killed. Kissinger, 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 Kissinger. Yes, we need a uniform standard of justice to hold all those accountable. We have to bring Osama bin Laden and his allies before an international criminal court, and they should be tried, and if found guilty, severely punished, and so should Henry Kissinger be tried. And that'll send a powerful message to the rest of the world that says, we believe in a uniform standard of justice. Here you have Bush unsigning the International Criminal Court Treaty and pushing country after country to sign bilateral agreements with the United States that says we will not hold U.S. officials or U.S. soldiers accountable precisely to protect people like Henry Kissinger, forcing these countries, especially poorer countries, to sign on. And the U.S. says if not, they'll cut off military aid, and they have, to dozens of countries, to places, believe it or not, like Peru and Colombia, which might make the world a better place. Yeah. So there is a silver lining to that one. But it is so important that the rest of the world knows that we all hold ourselves and country leaders and armies accountable in the same way. That will make the world a safer place. That is what we must demand. And we must have leaders, elected leaders, not selected leaders, who represent the popular will in this country. Not leaders who not only come to power through their own selections, like George Bush, but who then try to nullify other elections, like we're seeing in California. Never doubt for a moment that what is happening in California with that recall, whatever you think of that Governor Gray Davis, never doubt for a moment that it wasn't hatched in California. That it will be a great boon to another party if that state is run by the other party when it comes to the 2004 election. After all, we saw how beneficial it was in Florida to have it run not only by the man who came to power, but to have it run by the first brother, by Jeb Bush. But that may very well backfire against the Republicans, because now we see the governor of Nebraska, Republican governor, they are demanding a recall for. Right now, the Bush administration is in big trouble. We watched it on Sunday on Meet the Press. Dick Cheney putting forward the lies. Geographical base of 911, and what were the examples used? Let's go quickly through the rationale. One, he said, what's connecting 911 to Iraq and why we had to invade, because they've given up on the weapons of mass destruction, is 1993, the terrible bombing of the World Trade Center. It was an Iraqi, he said, a man named Ahmed Rahman Yassin, who was involved in that. He was Iraqi, and he ultimately went back to Iraq, of course, which leads you to say, okay, if you're going to implicate a government, whatever you think of Saddam Hussein, but if you're going to implicate a government because a person is from that country, if we're going to use that logic, how about 911? 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. Now, not to implicate a country for what their citizens do, but he used the example of Ahmed Rahman Yassin and said he is from Iraq, and we have very good evidence to suggest that he is being supported by the Iraqi government, and he is back in Iraq right now. So we did a little research. It didn't take much. 60 Minutes 1 year ago did a report, for example, on him. In fact, Leslie Stahl went to Iraq and interviewed him in jail. Ahmed Rahman Yassin was taken by the FBI after the World Trade Center bombing. They had him in custody. He brought the FBI agents to a bomb factory where they believed the bomb was made for the 1993 bombing, and then they released him. He left the next night for Iraq. When he got to Iraq, within the first year, he was arrested and has been held for the last 8 years. Tariq Aziz first went to the Clinton administration through several other countries, one of them being Egypt, and said, take this man back, knowing that he could be used as a rationale to bomb Iraq, saying they had nothing to do with him. The Clinton administration would not respond. Clinton out, Bush in, they make the request again. They say, we will give him to you forthwith if you will simply sign the receipt that says you have taken him. That is why they had Leslie Stahl come. She interviewed Tariq Aziz, and she interviewed him in jail. but the Bush administration refused to take him back. It was only after 9/11, 8 years later, that they put him on the FBI most wanted list. Not after 1993, and put a $25 million bounty on his head and said he was one of the 25 most wanted terrorists in the United States. So take him back then. And finally, you have the deck of cards that the Pentagon has put out, and we called them up and said, is Ahmed Rahman Yassin in this 55-person deck of cards? He is one of the 25 most wanted terrorists, the FBI says, on the front pages of the FBI list. Why isn't he in the deck of cards? Why aren't they looking for him? And yet this is the man that they are using to justify the current invasion of Iraq. They simply had to pick him up. And then they use the example, Dick Cheney had the nerve to say Mohammed Atta met with an Iraqi agent in Prague right before the 9/11 bombing, Mohammed Atta, the hijacker. Václav Havel, the president of the Czech Republic, said this was not the case a long time ago. The FBI and the CIA investigated, and they found that it's most likely that Mohammed Atta was in fact in Florida at the time of the allegation that he was meeting with an Iraqi agent. That story has been entirely debunked. And yet Cheney raised it again to show the link. When Russert asked him about the Saudi connection and asked him if he could respond to that Vanity Fair report, I encourage everyone to read this week's Vanity Fair, Craig Unger's report, or go to Democracy Now! And listen to our Tuesday show where we interview him. You heard the story, and it's been floating around now for a long time, that after 9/11, when the U.S. government locked down all air traffic, right, I think Craig Unger said the skies were emptier than they had been any other time, back to the Wright brothers. The U.S. government authorized the flying out of 140 Saudis, including 24 members of the bin Laden family. The shock of the head of Logan Airport and Newark Airport, dealing with the trauma of the planes coming from those airports. They were severely locked down, and they are trying to set up their new regulations and rules to open the airports. And they are told that these planes are going to fly out with members of the bin Laden family, and they are not to ask questions. Now, no one should implicate anyone. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Not every member of a family is responsible, is their brother's keeper. But you would think that there would be a list of the names of the people who were flown out, that they would have been questioned by the FBI and federal authorities to think of how many innocent people are being held now as material witnesses simply because of their nationality. These are blood relations. What do they know? What leads do they have? Instead, they are immediately flown out so that they can never be questioned again. Let's look at who wasn't allowed to fly. Gore was grounded. Clinton was grounded. A heart patient was waiting for a heart, a critically ill transplant patient who died because they would not let that heart fly to its destination where the patient was, but they flew out. It was so important to fly out immediately. Scores of members of the bin Laden family. Who was Bush Sr. with the night before on September? And these aren't conspiracy theories, these are simply facts. September 10th, 2001 at the Ritz-Carlton in Washington, D.C., they were having their meeting of the Carlyle Group. The Carlyle Group, that private equity firm that's one of the largest defense contractors in the world, that James Baker is a part of, that George Bush is a part of, that former Defense Secretary Frank Carlucci is a part of. There was Bush, there was the bin Laden brother. They were having their meeting. The next morning, Bush flies out with Barbara, and yes, they are grounded as well, and they are forced to land. We have to look at this complicated financial web. It was only after tremendous embarrassment and exposure that the bin Ladens were forced to pull out millions, if they did in fact, from the Carlyle Group. These are very terrible times where we've all suffered, but we have to look at for whom this is boon times. And it's boon times for the Carlyle Group, for the military contractors of this country. And we've got to ask the questions. And when Russert said to Dick Cheney, what about the Saudi Arabians? What about the bin Laden family? Though he didn't say bin Laden, the bin Laden family that was flown out. He said he didn't know about this. And then you have the story of the Niger-Iraq connection as we wrap up. We already know about the 16 words in the State of the Union address, right, that George Bush uttered saying that Saddam Hussein was trying to buy uranium from Niger, using an African country to justify the invasion of Iraq. And it turns out it wasn't true. And even the White House had to retract this story. And who was it that exposed it but the former ambassador to Iraq under Bush, Joseph Wilson, who was sent by the CIA in February of 2002 to Niger to investigate the claim. He said the documents were bogus, they were forged, and yet almost a year later Bush is saying it in his State of the Union address. Okay, we know the story. And finally, Joseph Wilson is so enraged at how often they are using this excuse that he comes forward and says, I was the ambassador who did the investigation this past summer. He said it. He said, you know that it's not true. That forced the White House to retract the statement. And here is Cheney raising it again. And so what does the White House do? The next thing we know, Robert Novak has written a piece, the conservative columnist, saying that Joseph Wilson's wife is a CIA operative.
Oh my God.
Now, it is a felony to expose a covert CIA operative because it exposes them. It blows all their cover and all the agents that they work with and assets on the ground, and it endangers their lives. And Novak says, very close to the White House, that Bush administration officials told him. And so the White House was asked about this, and they said, no, this is ridiculous, not quite saying it wasn't true. And so they asked, the reporters asked, are you saying Novak's a liar who works with them, for them, I mean with them? And they try to skirt around it, so they expose the wife. If you do that, it is a felony. There should be immediate investigation. Is the White House investigating who exposed this within the White House? We called the FBI, White House. They said, call the FBI. We called the FBI. They said, well, we're asking questions. It hasn't risen to the level of investigation. These people are breaking their own laws, but I do think it shows that they are unraveling. And there is Dick Cheney saying there was the Niger-Iraq connection. Once again, saying this on Sunday. These are very important times. They are times of opportunity. And it's very important we don't believe everything or almost anything that the media says. As the 10th candidate comes forward for the Democratic Party nomination for president, Wesley Clark, calling him an anti-war warrior. We watch CNN nonstop at Democracy Now!, and I have repeatedly quoted him for the last year, this general who redefines general news because he's on the payroll of CNN, continually cheerleading for this war, celebrating when Baghdad was taken, talking about the courage of Blair and Bush and how the rest of the world better come on board, and he is an anti-war warrior? You've got to challenge the media. You have to stop questioning your own experience and question what it is that they are saying. The fact when the invasion took place that they simply showed us the bombs over Baghdad, that fireworks display, not the pictures of thousands of people, men, women, children, girls and boys dead on the ground, because the media well knows that if you see those civilians on the ground, the vast majority of people in this country would say why. They say why when American soldiers come home in body bags, and they would say why when they see innocent children dead as a result of U.S. bombs, and so they simply don't show you the pictures. We asked Aaron Brown of CNN why. Why aren't they showing us the pictures that all over Europe they're seeing on television, all over the Arab countries they're seeing? This is not a different war, it is the same war. And if the people of this country got a chance simply for a week to see nonstop the picture, and that's what it would take, the pictures of people who have died on the ground, not just the pictures from the embedded reporters on the front lines who are suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, right? No, that's not a fair thing to say, but who are very much their lives are in the hands of the people that they are covering. These reporters is afraid of the soldiers on the front line, though they have powerful weapons. They are bringing us one picture. But what about the reporters? Why aren't reporters embedded in Iraqi communities to let us know what it feels like to be at the target? And what about reporters embedded in the peace movement all over the world to give us a fair picture of what war means? We asked Aaron Brown why they're not showing the pictures, and he said those pictures are tasteless. We said war is tasteless. Show us the pictures of blood and gore, and the media will end war within a week. That it is not an alternative that any civilization would accept. You know Gandhi's line, what do you think of Western civilization? He responded, it would be a good idea. Let's take that to heart. Finally, it is so critical to challenge the mainstream media. They are using the public airwaves in the same way that Pacifica is, that NPR is, that PBS is, and it is absolutely critical to shore up independent media. We have a tremendous year of opportunity. This is a year where we can go to the death row of Illinois and find that it is empty because of grassroots activists who have fought against the death penalty, because of students at Northwestern who started having people on death row exonerated, which led to reporters at the Chicago Tribune exposing what was going on, and then the conservative Republican governor saying to death row, no. That started from the grassroots and made its way up. The people of Timor are free. They are a nation of survivors. They are the latest independent country in the world. There is hope in the world. Independent media and grassroots groups have beaten back the FCC, and now, this year, with all of these groups activated, from the anti-war groups to the media and democracy movement to the anti-death penalty activists to people who are fighting for privacy against corporations and government that would pry into our personal lives, we make up the majority of people in this country. Your voices must be heard. We must support the media who goes to where the silence is and allows you to say something. Thank you very much.
People love, people love, people love. But what will we tell our children if they see you kiss? People who love each other kiss. What will our children learn from lessons such as this? People who love each other kiss.